Welcome, everybody. It is Zen Money Monday. I am Liz LaJoy, the Zen Money CFO, as you all know, and I'm super excited because today we are talking with my good friend Bev Davidek around legal stuff. Fun stuff. Now, we all know that if we're building a business, there's some version of lawyering that we may want. Some of us go out and find it ourselves. Some of us call a lawyer or an attorney originally when we say, okay, I want to start a business. What do I do? There's all kinds of different pieces of this puzzle, and we don't often know where to go. So I wanted to invite Bev on today to talk a little bit around entrepreneurship, the things we need to pay attention to, what we can maybe not worry about right now, and just how to navigate this piece of our puzzle that sometimes feels a little bit murky. Bev has built multiple businesses herself in addition to being an awesome attorney, so she's a really great resource for us. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
We've talked about this a lot in other venues, but I'm curious from your perspective, what is you've done a lot of work with entrepreneurs, small business owners. I know you do a lot of different kinds of law, but in particular around the business building, what do you see as the biggest issue or the first piece of the puzzle that most people come to you with?
Most people come to me, unfortunately, after they already have created a bit of a mess. And so it's kind of a triage situation. So let's figure out what, sometimes we've got this handwritten agreement in place, or maybe there's no agreement in place and things are already starting to go south on a particular matter. And so, as you know, Liz, what I like to do is to get out in front of that and work with businesses to make sure all of their legal ducks are in a row in a way that makes sense before they actually start taking in money on their business. But I think the main thing that I see is people trying to go it alone. They feel like they're spending all their money getting their business going, which is certainly understandable. And it doesn't seem like maybe the legal issues are top of mind, something that they want to carve out, room in their budget for. So they try to go it alone, and then they realize that they need some fixing. So that's the biggest thing that I see, unfortunately.
And I think that's true probably for many of us, especially in the sort of behind the scenes support service type of stuff. Sometimes we have to make mistakes before we go, oh, wait, there's value in talking to an expert about this.
Yeah.
But even before the messy stuff, what are the main pieces of the puzzle that you think are really important to put in play? I mean, you mentioned contracts. Obviously, that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, one of the ways that I like to work with my clients is, let's look first at what's the appropriate legal entity that you need to have. Sometimes it might make sense for businesses to stay as a sole proprietor, especially if their business is kind of a side hustle, sort of a hobby situation. But I believe that the way that you show up in your business is really going to set the tone for how successful you're going to be. So, for instance, setting up the right legal entity. Most of my clients that I work with, it's going to be an LLC, but that can vary depending upon the business, the type of business, how fast the person wants to grow, things of that nature. So just knowing what are your options in terms of having the right legal entity in place, having that legal structure, both for liability reasons and also just to start stepping into the role of the type of business owner that you want to be. And I can tell you, even though you mentioned that I've had a lot of businesses, some more successful than others, right? And I've been a lawyer now for 25 years, but even lawyers oftentimes get this wrong. And it's like we want to start making money on the business before we really get those structures in place. But I think that's the most important thing, is to at least sit down with a lawyer and start thinking through what makes sense to do. What type of legal entity and at what point. Most of the time, I think my small business clients are open to going ahead and getting the legal structure in place. And usually that's an LLC.
Can you give us a brief synopsis for those who may not be as comfortable or familiar with the different steps from a sole proprietor, which is just doing your work and, coming through into your own personal pocket versus all the way up to an incorporated state? I'm not sure everyone understands the legal ramifications of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So with LLCs, at least in Texas, where I'm licensed, the process involves, first of all, you've got to make sure that the name is available, right? So you've got to make sure that that's that you check that through the Secretary of State's office. And it's a pretty simple process just to file the application through the Secretary of State. And then once that that is approved, you get your operating agreement, you get your certificate of formation, all of those legal pieces are aligned. Then it's a matter of, sitting down with a lawyer and making sure that that's going to match up with the type of business that you have versus taking a cookie cutter approach. So just knowing basically how your business is going to be run and having the liability protection that an LLC can afford the business.
I really appreciate that conversation, because what I have seen on my side in terms of talking with people, a lot of times people will go to someone, an accountant often, or even an attorney, and they haven't really started up. They haven't really fully defined how they're going to work and seen any kind of success yet. And yet they're encouraged to become an incorporated state, to set up an S Corp or even a C Corp before there's really dollars coming in the door. And that from a money standpoint can be really problematic, because there are certain financial requirements like running payroll that go along with that. And if we don't have the cash flow to support that, that higher level of entity doesn't necessarily make sense right out of the gate. So I'm curious your perspective from a legal standpoint, because I was always told it's easier to build up. We can be a sole proprietor and then create an LLC, and then we can file as an S Corp, for example, but it's very hard to go the other way.
Right. I absolutely agree with that. I was just having this conversation with a friend and a business startup, hopefully new client of mine, this past weekend. And he was given that advice immediately to have the LLC and set up payroll and all of that. But you could, as you well know, you can still have the LLC move from your sole prop to an LLC. But I always advise, meet with your tax person, meet with your financial person, make sure that the income is where it needs to be. Liz, I'd be curious to hear what you say about this. I use as a rule of thumb about $100,000 a year is when it starts to make sense to file as an S Corp. So yeah, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. But it can be, I guess what I'm saying is, from my perspective, it can be phased in. It's an issue of separating out the legal issues from the tax issues, but you can still have an LLC and take advantage of that.
Right. Yeah, I think, from a tax perspective, that is not my zone of genius. I get to work with really brilliant tax people. But what I've found on a day-to-day operational standpoint, that even $100,000 in income, right, that's maybe $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 if we're lucky in our pocket in those first few years, and running payroll off of that and the reporting requirements and everything else. That's actually probably a little low from my perspective. I think I see it as being more beneficial when we've gotten to a point of, okay, this is real and sustainable, and we have a few years under our belt. And, that might, for many people, dollars wise, that's more in the maybe $300,000 to $500,000 range. But I also know people who are higher than that, who just continue to take what are called owner's draws and don't set up payroll, which is a whole nother issue that we will talk about on another episode.
Right. Yep.
But I just think it's important for you, the listener, to be thinking about where you're at right now, if you're set up as a particular entity, or if you're still working just under your own name as a sole proprietor, which is what we say in the States here, actually in Canada as well. And if you're looking to establish something else. Now, from a legal standpoint, there is benefit to establishing an entity type, obviously. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the benefit of having an entity type is that it's going to separate out your personal debt, for instance, is the personal liabilities from the business. And so it's going to create that level of protection if you should get sued. And nobody ever wants to think that they're going to be sued, but we know that it happens all the time. And so that's also one of the reasons why I am a proponent in setting up that legal entity. Although it can make sense, like you mentioned, depending upon the type of business, to remain a sole prop until you've got the income coming in. Some of the issues that come into play, obviously, what's the type of business that you have? Is it something where you're more likely, is it a risky type of business where maybe you're more vulnerable to a lawsuit? Nobody has a crystal ball. We don't always know for sure, but depending upon the type of business that a person has, it might make more sense to go ahead and have those liability protections in place early on. Yeah.
Let's wrap back around for a second to the contract conversation, because this is an area that a lot of people that I talk to get very uncomfortable around, because we know we're supposed to have one, but we don't necessarily know what it entails, and it feels very complicated. Can you help walk us through sort of the basics that we need to cover for ourselves contractually?
So contractually, the main thing is just to have, depending on the type of business, I work with businesses in getting, if you're a consultant, you want to have that consultant agreement in place, right? If you've got some independent contractors working for you, I'll work with small businesses to make sure that they've got those independent contractor agreements. And again, the idea is that, sometimes people feel like, oh, it's going to kill my business. I don't want to have those contracts. We're just doing this, through a handshake sort of thing. But as soon as that relationship starts to go south, it's that contract that, folks really need to have in place. And so to me, I like to approach it that I like to say, I'm not a deal killer when it comes to contracts. I want to help both parties to be able to move forward. So to use a trite phrase, to make it a win-win. Right. So I really like working with my clients to sit down with them and figure out what are the pieces that you need to have in here. I also have kind of a hack where I can help people draft their own agreements if they're not quite ready to work with a lawyer, but at least they can have the basic elements in there so that there's a meeting of the minds with the person that they're engaging in business with, whatever it might be.
I love this conversation, as you know, because from my perspective, from an internal business management standpoint, the contract world is actually ripe with golden opportunities to develop an awesome client relationship. And so we talk about going from the contract to cash cycle. If we want to bring the money piece into play, not only does a contract give us some liability support, but it also can be a great tool to to coordinate with our clients around, here's what we're doing, here's what you're expected to do, and to really line item out the expectations so that as you're getting down the pike, sometimes a handshake deal or even just pay me through my PayPal link, it's not always super clear what you're delivering and what the client can expect. And you can get halfway down into that relationship and then people kind of go, oh no, I thought you were doing A and you were expecting to do B. And then there's a disconnect, and a contract can really clarify all of that right at the beginning.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you and I have talked about that before. And it's so true that, and I always look at it as you're going through that negotiation process, if you're the client, and where are the stumbling blocks with the other party? If there are going to be any, you'd rather know now before you start that relationship, like get it out in the open. So I think that it can be an incredible tool, not only, as you mentioned, in relationship building, what's this working relationship going to look like, but also it can show where are the holes, right? And so to think of a contract more in terms of, we've got to have all the legal boilerplate in there for sure, but I like to approach it, hey, here's what I've got going on over here if I'm the client. What have you got going on, and let's work this out so that both parties can be happy before there's an exchange of money and before, like you said, they're well on their way in their working relationship, and then they've got a problem.
Yeah. I think I think we both want to encourage everybody out there to think of the contractual piece not as something that I'll deal with later, but something that's actually a wonderful tool in your toolbox, because it will get you supported within your business to make sure that your legalese is in place to protect you, but also to protect your client, and ultimately to have this conversation around, here's what we're going to do, and here's what happens if it doesn't go exactly the way we expected it to make sure that you get paid the way that you're supposed to. Right. The other piece of the contract is often that I say to people, look, you can make a decision later on. Let's say that in our contract we have a late fee clause that says if I don't get paid within X days after the due date, then we will start assessing finance charges. This is a really standard business practice. And a lot of clients, especially if you're a solopreneur or somebody kind of in the creative space, that feels really uncomfortable to implement. Okay, I want you to have the choice though, because sometimes we really just need to be able to implement it. And if it's not in our contract, it's a lot harder to stand by. However, if it is in your contract, then you get to choose whether you're going to actually pull the trigger on it or not. So you're covered, but you don't have to be that kind of business either, depending on the circumstances.
Right. Yeah, definitely agree with that. Yeah, the contract is, this is what we're going to rely upon if we don't agree on something, and it can be useful in that way. And then going back to what I said earlier, when we were talking more about the type of business entity, but with contracts, it's true as well, that how do you want to show up for your business? Is your business a hobby, or is it a legitimate business, that you want to be able to grow and do things in a professional manner. So the contracts, having the right contracts in place also is that peace of mind for business owners to be able to say, okay, I'm serious about this. And now the other parties are going to take them more seriously, in my experience. And that was another thing, actually, going back to the LLC, that I wanted to mention. Depending upon the type of business, you may be trying to do business with another client or another business, and they're going to take you more seriously sometimes if you've got more of a business entity set up, a legal structure beyond a sole prop. So just going back to that for a moment. But again, the theme is, how do you want to show up to be the business owner that you want to be, to grow and scale your business?
And there's nothing to say that you can't. There are plenty of successful people who stay sole proprietors, who do things a little bit more on the fly, and are happy with that. I think the biggest concern is making sure that you are consciously choosing that model if it's a good fit for you, as opposed to staying with it because you weren't aware of your alternatives and things like that.
Absolutely. Agree 100% on that one.
Can we talk a little bit about, so one thing that I wanted to share with our listeners is, the fact that I think a lot of us feel about the legal profession as, we don't really understand it. It's very expensive. I feel like if I have to pick up the phone, I'm going to be paying, $700 just to, make a phone call. And you've seen the gamut of this in your lifetime. You work in this world, but then you've also built other businesses. And I'm curious, from your perspective, ways to deal with how people should be approaching the attorneys in their life and what kind of relationship they can be building that feels better than sort of our normal MO when we think about attorney-client relationship.
Yeah, I'm so thankful for that question, because one of the things that I've noticed that makes me very happy about my profession is less of a tendency to just follow the same traditional business model when it comes to working with a lawyer. I think there's a shift towards not only flat fee billing, but a hybrid, type of billing, because it doesn't always make sense to bill clients by the hour. And I think that's part of what, in my experience anyway, causes people not to want to pick up the phone, reach out to their lawyer, certainly not in a preventive way. They're going to wait till the building's on fire because they know the clock's ticking once they pick up the phone. So you mentioned, maybe a $700 bill. In my experience, clients want to know what they're getting. And so in my office anyway, I implement a flat fee, billable model. I don't bill by the hour in my office. And that's because of the type of work that I do, right? There certainly are some areas of practice that wouldn't lend themselves to that. But I like to work in more of a transactional manner, but it's more of a relational manner. So I serve as family's trusted advisor, whether it's a small business or whether it's on the estate planning side. And so for me anyway, clients who are looking for more of that relationship type of approach with their lawyer, who might be concerned about the sticker shock, they might be afraid of the bill that they're going to get in the mail, I would say reach out in your community. Look, don't be afraid to interview different lawyers. Ask them, what's your process for getting to know my business and getting to know me, so that you can do your best work in helping me to be able to grow and scale my business. How am I going to get billed? Will you bill by the hour? Will I have, an initial meeting with you so that we can figure out what you're going to work on, and then we can agree upon a flat fee for what is going to be appropriate for that?
I love that perspective, because I think so many of us think that when we're going to start working with somebody, especially in the professional level, whether that's an accountant or an attorney or even, a physician, for example, somebody with letters after their name, we expect them to kind of lead the charge. But the reality is, it's your business, it's your life. And I think both Bev and I would encourage everybody listening to think about those relationships that way. You get to choose how it goes. I've heard so many myriad stories, particularly around people working with bookkeepers or even accountants, where they've had a really negative experience and they don't feel confident or comfortable stepping up and asking for what they need and asking questions about how it might go, or even thinking about, I can interview. Not everybody is created equal. We all think, lawyers, they're all the same, right? Of course they're not. Accountants, they're all the same, but they're not. And so making sure that you're taking the initiative for yourself so that this all feels better and works the way you want it to work, doing a little due diligence and making sure you're a good personal fit with somebody is really important, because otherwise you're not going to want to pick up the phone and get those really important questions answered. And that defeats the entire purpose.
Right. So true. And, the way that I work with clients is I'll sit down with an agenda, and part of that agenda includes, there's a point where we're deciding, does it seem like we're going to be a good fit to go forward? And if so, then now let's start to, I mentioned, triaging, what do we need to do first earlier in the conversation. So now we can start to design what is the right legal package, if you will, which we'll create, back and forth. And then what's an appropriate fee for that? Now, not every lawyer is going to be open to that. And not every client's going to necessarily want or need that type of relationship. But my point is that they are out there. And at least in the way that I work with small businesses, I find that really seems to work not only for my business, but also for the business owner that I'm sitting with across the table.
Yeah, I love that. I happen to know that you have something that you've been working on that you've created particularly for the business owners in your life, the entrepreneurs that you work with, that looks a little bit more holistically than I think most attorneys do. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think you're asking me about the LIFT.
Yes.
The LIFT program that I implement in my office. And so the idea is that LIFT stands for Legal, Insurance, Finance, and Tax. And the way that I like to work with small businesses is I'll ask the business owner just to go through, it's a little bit of homework on their end, but it helps me to do a better job on my end. And as you mentioned, to help them to build their business, grow their business in a way that maybe is more of a holistic approach than a traditional model that most lawyers will take. So LIFT, as I mentioned, legal, insurance, finance, and tax. Those are the four pillars that I think every business needs to have in place. And what I discovered earlier in my career is that if I was giving legal advice, then maybe that wouldn't necessarily jive with the insurance, finance, and tax advice that my clients were getting from those other professional advisors, even if they even had those other professional advisors in place. So sometimes I'll have clients who don't have those other professional advisors, and then we start talking about who are some folks in the community that you might be able to work on some of those other pillars. And I like to get permission from my clients to be able to talk to their other professional advisors as well. But it starts with them, just with the client going through a little bit of a homework process and going through kind of a checklist to figure out what of those legal, insurance, finance, and tax issues are important now or might be important coming up, so that we can really prioritize and have more of a holistic approach, so that their job is to grow their business. Just do your business, make money, and let your professional team work on your behalf.
I really love that, because I think so often all of this gets siloed. And from my perspective, from a internal business management standpoint, it's obvious that we need all of those pieces of the puzzle. But to know that there are professionals out there also thinking the same way, because oftentimes I think professionals silo themselves and sort of say, well, that's not my deal, right? That I'll deal with you with legal stuff, and there's some crossover with insurance, but I'm not really going to have that other conversation or the tax conversation or whatever it might be. And I think it's really important, because so many of us are our businesses. So then when we think about building relationships with all of these different people who aren't talking to each other, and then we're the project manager to coordinate all of that, it can feel very overwhelming, particularly if all we really want to do is the thing that we love to do and make money at it. So I think it's whether you work with somebody who utilizes something like Bev does and looks at the holistic piece of the puzzle, at the very least, think about the fact that you want all of this to be integrated as much as possible for you and your business, because it makes it flow so much more easily.
Yep, absolutely.
So if there is one thing that you would like people to take away thinking about their business from a growth standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from a just generally feeling better about keeping their ducks in a row, what would it be?
I think you just touched on it. I mean, obviously, I don't want to over promote the LIFT approach, but maybe somebody would want to work with their own professional advisor in their community, and don't take mine, although folks are welcome to, but just to sit down and look at the business holistically, look at what's happening now. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? And you hit the nail on the head, Liz. Don't think about it like I'm going to get the legal part done and then I'll move on to insurance. Or it's really a holistic approach. And I think the best thing that folks can do is to sit down. Maybe they've got a professional advisor who's a CPA and they don't have a lawyer yet, but start somewhere. Somebody that is some sort of trusted advisor that can help you to start uncovering those pieces. What do I need to know? Maybe I've got some blind spots. So I'm a big proponent of the lift that we talked about, but folks could just do that, pull out a spiral notebook or get on a laptop and just start brainstorming, and then start with the one professional advisor that you do have. I mean, maybe they're already working with you and they don't have a lawyer yet, but that's a place to start with one of those pillars. And then you can build it out from there and start to prioritize.
Did you always have this background or this understanding? I'm curious, I kind of want to change the conversation to you and your business growth. What is the biggest aha or mistake turned into great lesson that you've gleaned over the years? Because not only, as I said, are you an attorney, but you have a coaching business with your husband. You've done a bunch of different things. So you've seen business from a variety of standpoints, not just the professional service provider.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the hardest lesson and the most valuable lesson was during a time period when I actually thought I was going to retire from the practice of law. Come to find out it was a sabbatical, and I returned to it in a way that I now love for all the reasons that we've been talking about, because I've definitely changed the way that I practice. But part of it really came from the hard lesson of when my husband Dirk and I had a wellness center in San Antonio, Texas. And when we ran that wellness center, I didn't want to think about being a lawyer. I didn't want to have anything to do with law. I was really burned out from having been in corporate law, and I just wanted something so totally different. That the cobbler wasn't wearing any shoes, right? And I put up my own blinders. And so I definitely can relate to people who aren't even lawyers, who are in business, not wanting to look at it. We don't want to look at a mess that we secretly kind of know that we're creating. We'll fix it when the time comes. But in our experience, we never got to the point of being able to fix it before, it was just, we didn't grow it in the right way. We didn't step through it in any sort of methodical process. We did as it related to the products and services, but not from a legal perspective. And as a lawyer, I look back and I certainly knew better. So it is easy to ignore. And that was a hard lesson, but it served me well. It actually brought me to practicing law now in a way that I love. And so in a sense, I guess it was meant to be, but I know that that's a real thing that you talk about.
Do you feel that part of what created that circumstance was because you felt you could go it alone because of your experience as an attorney, and that you didn't necessarily need to have a sounding board outside of yourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that's true. It's like, okay, I reviewed the lease, we signed it. We had basic contracts in place, but we certainly didn't have a team of professional advisors like we've been talking about today. We didn't approach it. It was funny because it was a holistic wellness center, but we didn't approach our business holistically from the standpoint of legal, insurance, finance, and tax, and just having all those pieces aligned. Yeah.
I love that you just said that, because I think that, that is my biggest dream for everybody listening, is that they can feel about and give focus to the internal workings of their business from how do we create a holistic wellness approach within our business itself to be able to then go and do bigger and better things. So I think that story is really interesting. Thank you for sharing it, because it just goes to show we all need sometimes a third party eye or some version of, hey, have we checked all the boxes? Because we can think that we're totally in shape and we'll still miss stuff. We have those blind spots. So I thank you for sharing that, because I think while that may not have been a comfortable experience to go through for you and your husband, it certainly, helps the rest of us learn, which is important.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, a lot of good things came out of it, as I mentioned. And so now it's funny, people walk into my office and into my law firm, and they'll kind of look around and sometimes think that it feels a little more like they're going to get a massage here, or So we kind of have our wellness center combined with a law firm now. And so that's part of what came out of it too, is learning how to run a business in a way that addresses both, I'll say the qualitative side and the quantitative side. You've got to have a good balance with that. You can't just go one direction with one or the other.
Yeah. And I think all of us would love to walk into an attorney's office that feels like a spa. Can we make that a movement? That sounds great.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Working on it.
So I always ask everyone this question. So I'm going to ask you as well. For you in your various businesses and how you see entrepreneurs working, what is your definition of Zen money?
When you ask me that question, I think of peace of mind, right? And, Zen money, it's so many of us worry so much about the bottom line, right? And especially business owners as they're trying to grow. We're so focused on the money part of it in a stressful way. Mm-hmm. And so when you say Zen money, I think, having that peace of mind where you can confidently know what you're bringing in, paying yourself, that's very important. And I think it goes back to having those structures in place, having those 4 pillars in place. That's the peace of mind from which you can really grow your business, pay yourself, and have a sustainable business as well.
I love that. Thank you. So if anyone wants to hear more about the LIFT program or to connect with you and see what you've got going on, how can they reach out?
They could send me an email. So if they want to send an email to info at davideclaw.com. So Davidec's kind of a long last name, Czech name, but it's davideclaw.com. So info at davideclaw.com. And we'll be happy to send you information. If somebody wants to do their own LIFT audit, we can send that out to them.
Perfect.
So that's the best way to reach me.
Great. Thanks, Bev. And we will put that information in the notes too, so everyone can connect with you easily. But thank you so much for joining me on today's Zen Money Monday. It's always great to talk with you. And if anyone, I can't recommend Bev highly enough. She takes a really beautiful approach to looking at your business with you. And it's an important conversation to have. Law doesn't have to be scary. The legal piece of your business doesn't have to feel overwhelming, but it is an important one. So let's not shy away from it.
Great. Yep. Thanks so much, Liz. It was a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Great. And we will see all of you next week.